Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When my father left me 7 acres of untouched Carolina shoreline, I thought I'd found peace. But a handshake deal with a charming neighbor turned into a war with an HOA tyrant, one that would spiral into sabotage, lawsuits, and a fight to save my land at any cost. I've always believed that land remembers kindness, that if you treat it right, care for it, don't try to tame it too much, it rewards you with peace and quiet, the kind you can't find in city limits or behind a white picket fence. That's why, when my father passed and left me his 7-acre slice of lakefront Carolina heaven, I packed up my life and moved out here with zero hesitation. No regrets. The land wasn't fancy. It had a spring-fed pond so clear you could see the fish darting around the reeds and massive oaks that had probably been there before electricity came to the region. There was a small dock, an old wooden swing my dad had rigged between 2 trees, and a narrow dirt road that wound its way from the county road to my modest cedar house. The lake shimmered through the trees in the morning light, and at night, the bullfrogs and crickets gave private concerts. It was perfect. That's where I met Henry. Henry Miller was the president of the neighboring HOA community, Chestnut Glen, I think they called it, though it had more pavers than chestnuts. He was an older guy with a limp and a gentle way about him, wore suspenders even with t-shirts. We met one afternoon when I was digging out an old stump near the pond, and he strolled over like he was heading to a church picnic. He didn't waste time, said he'd been watching the property for years and loved how my dad kept it natural. Then he offered me a deal. His HOA had no direct access to any natural water, and their community events were usually crammed into their postage stamp rec lawn between a dog park and the dumpster area. He proposed they could use a portion of my shoreline for community gatherings, once a month or so. Nothing big, no construction, and certainly no claims on the land. He even promised they'd maintain the area at their expense. I'd retain full ownership and could use it whenever I wanted. Honestly, I liked the guy, and the offer didn't seem unreasonable. I threw a few conditions of my own. No permanent structures, no uninvited guests, and if anything ever made me uncomfortable, the deal was off. He agreed immediately, and we sealed it with a handshake over lemonade on my porch. That was the beginning of a strange, slow dance of shared space. Under Henry's direction, they added a few thoughtful touches: a simple wooden gazebo near the water, a gravel path, a couple of benches, a grill. They even landscaped the bank a bit, clearing out overgrowth and planting local wildflowers. It all looked tasteful, restrained, and above all, respectful. I was impressed. In fact, I started using the space more myself. I hosted family cookouts, had my sister's kids over to fish, even invited a few HOA families to join on weekends. The atmosphere was good. People were polite, grateful, and treated the space like a privilege, not a right. Henry always made sure someone was there to clean up, and if anything went wrong, like that time a kid broke a bench, he fixed it personally. For nearly 3 years, everything stayed civil and smooth. The HOA held a handful of events each year: picnics, yoga mornings, 4th of July barbecues. I got thank you cards. People waved when they passed. Some even dropped off pies at my doorstep. It didn't feel transactional, it felt neighborly. I never bothered to get anything in writing. Part of it was trust. Henry was old school like me. And the other part, I just never imagined anyone would abuse such a straightforward, generous arrangement. But trust, I would soon learn, is only as strong as the people it rests on, and Henry, bless his soul, was not immortal. Henry passed away in his sleep one mild October evening, just as the leaves were starting to burn red and gold along the pond's edge. It hit the community hard. Say what you will about old men in leadership roles, Henry was a damn good neighbor. His funeral was packed. People cried. A few even hugged me and said how grateful they were for the way he'd opened up the lake to the community. I didn't realize then how quickly grief could be replaced by policy. Enter Karen Maynard. Karen wasn't like Henry. She wasn't like anyone I'd dealt with out here. Picture a former corporate lawyer with a clipboard addiction and a chip on her shoulder the size of a Volvo. Late 50s, platinum hair cut into a weaponized bob, crisp pantsuits even on weekends. She had moved into Chestnut Glen just 6 months prior and had apparently spent that time compiling a binder of HOA inefficiencies. Within 3 weeks of Henry's death, Karen was elected president of the HOA board in what they called an emergency, Procedural vote. Apparently, someone forgot to notify me that hell had a bylaws committee. At first, she kept her distance. I figured she had bigger fish to micromanage. But then one morning, I was sipping coffee on my porch when I heard the unmistakable sound of diesel engines. I walked down the path and damn near dropped my mug. There were 2 trucks parked by the lake, one loaded with construction equipment, the other already unloading pallets of lumber. A few guys in neon vests were hammering stakes into the dirt around the gazebo, while another used orange spray paint to mark out a rectangular grid near the water's edge. I spotted a clipboard in a hard hat's hands and knew something was very, very wrong. I marched down there and waved my arms. "Hey, what the hell are you doing on my land?" One of the workers looked up, confused, then pointed behind me. "You'll have to ask the lady in charge." I turned around and there she was, Karen herself, standing with arms crossed, supervising like she was overseeing a war memorial. "Karen," I said slowly, "what is going on here?" She didn't even blink. "We're beginning site prep for the community guest cottages, 2 small cabins for HOA visitors and event lodging." My jaw tensed. "You're building on my property?" She gave a tight smile. "James, this shoreline has been used by the HOA for years. The gazebo, the grill, the furniture, all HOA maintained. It's essentially a de facto community amenity. Our lawyers believe we have a strong claim under prescriptive use." I laughed. Prescriptive what?" "Adverse possession," she clarified, like I was a child. "Backed by use, maintenance, and community investment. The board voted on it unanimously. It's no longer just yours." I don't remember what I said first. It might have been something colorful, something my dad would have smacked me for. But I do remember pulling out my phone, opening the cloud folder I kept on hand, and showing her a copy of the original deed. My name, the plot lines, everything. I reminded her of the handshake deal with Henry, how there was never any transfer, no contracts, just generosity. I told her the land was still mine, that nothing had changed. She barely looked at the screen. "Generosity doesn't supersede usage precedent," she said curtly. "If you want to challenge it, I suggest you prepare for court." Then she turned back to the construction crew and said, "Continue." I don't think I've ever felt such immediate boiling disbelief in my life. I could practically hear my father yelling in the back of my mind. That land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was our name, our memory. And now someone in high heels and HOA privilege was telling me I'd lost it because I'd been kind? Number. Not a chance in hell. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with my coffee pot on a loop, rereading the deed over and over like some clause would suddenly pop out saying, "By the way, if you're nice for too long, you forfeit everything." But no, every legal line, every measurement, every boundary was right there in black and white. That land was mine. The pond, the trees, the path, the damn gazebo I let them build. It was all on my property. The next morning, at precisely 8 o'clock, I called my lawyer. His name's Carter Lang. We go back a few years. He helped me when I first transferred the title from my dad. Carter's the kind of guy who reads HOA bylaws for fun, and he's got the kind of mind that sees loopholes as opportunities to choke someone with their own paperwork. When I explained what happened, he didn't even try to sugarcoat it. "James, this isn't a misunderstanding. This is a hostile land grab." Damn right it was. Within 2 hours, Carter had filed an emergency petition with the county court requesting an immediate injunction, a court order forcing the HOA to halt all activity and stay off the property until the matter could be reviewed. He told me to expect a call from the sheriff's office once the order was processed. I didn't have to wait long. Around noon, a black SUV with county plates pulled onto my gravel driveway. Deputy Ray Chavez stepped out. I'd met him before when a tree came down near the road and he helped redirect traffic. Good guy. He walked up slow, clipboard in hand. "Morning, James," he said. "Got something here for you." He handed me a folded copy of the court's ruling. I didn't even have to open it. I already knew what Carter had promised. "I appreciate it, Ray. Is she still down there?" "She is," he said, glancing toward the lake. "And she's got a real attitude." Figures. We walked down together. As we crested the path, I saw the scene again. The same workers, the same trucks, the same goddamn stakes in my soil. Karen stood at the center of it all, barking orders like a general. She looked up and narrowed her eyes when she saw the badge. "Ma'am," Ray said calmly, "you need to stop what you're doing immediately. I have a court order here stating that this land is private property and that all HOA personnel are to cease activity and vacate the area." Karen blinked like she hadn't heard him. This must be some sort of mistake. Our attorneys are preparing counterclaims. I don't care if your attorneys are raising the dead, Ray replied. This order stands unless it's overturned in court, which it hasn't been. Now I'm going to need everyone here to leave this property, or I'll start issuing trespassing citations. Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. You could see the gears grinding, trying to find a way to spin this in her favor. But she wasn't on a conference call now. This was real law on real soil. She turned sharply to the workers. "Pack it up," she snapped. It took less than 15 minutes for the whole crew to clear out, leaving tire tracks and broken stakes in the mud behind them. I stood there the whole time, arms crossed, heart pounding in my ears. When it was finally quiet again, I walked down to the lake's edge and stared at the spot where they'd marked off the cabin plots. It felt like standing on a battlefield after the smoke cleared. The only sound was the wind in the trees and the soft lap of water against the dock. Later that evening, Carter called. "They won't give up," he said bluntly. "Expect them to get creative. If they really believe they've got a shot with prescriptive easement, they'll start pushing hard in court and through the board. So what do? We go on offense. We've got the injunction. That's step one. Next, we file a formal cease and desist with the HOA. Then we notify every resident that the land is private and that anyone setting foot on it risks civil liability. You gave them years of goodwill. They used it to build a legal fantasy. Time to burn it down." Sounds like a plan. Over the next 2 days, we sent out letters, certified, and email to every HOA member on record. I printed copies and posted them in plastic sleeves on the trailheads leading toward my property. Private property, trespassing prohibited, under court protection. I even installed a trail camera, motion activated, infrared, tucked into the crook of a pine tree aimed right at the path near the gazebo, just in case. I thought that might be enough to scare them off. A sane person would have backed off after a court slapped them down. But Karen wasn't sane. She was a lawyer with a bruised ego and a vendetta, and I could feel her circling. The day after the notices went up, I found a note pinned to the dock railing with a pushpin, like we were playing some passive-aggressive version of Battleship. White envelope, my name on it in capital letters. Inside, a single-typed paragraph, unsigned. "You've made a mistake. This land has belonged to the community for years. A judge can't erase history. You'll regret making enemies where you used to have friends." I held the note for a long time, fingers twitching. Then I folded it in half, walked back to the house, and handed it straight to Carter. He read it once and said, "All right, let's hit them where it hurts." I should have known it wouldn't end with court orders and letters. The thing about people like Karen, they don't accept no like the rest of us. They hear it and treat it like an opening argument. And even after the injunction, the cease and desist, the notices on every path, I still felt like I was holding my breath. Like the storm hadn't passed. It was just circling above the treetops. It was a Thursday night when it happened. The day had been normal enough. I'd spent most of it clearing brush near the edge of the property line, fixing the drainage ditch that always clogged after rain. The sky was clear, the moon almost full, and around 10 I finally turned in, exhausted. I didn't hear anything during the night, not a whisper, but when I stepped outside the next morning, coffee in hand, I froze mid-step. The trail down to the pond looked like a war zone. Trash was everywhere. Beer cans, pizza boxes, empty plastic bottles, even a couple of soggy paper plates smeared with barbecue sauce. Someone had upended the grill, breaking off one of its legs. The patio chairs were scattered like they'd been tossed during a brawl. My hammock, the one I inherited from my father, had been torn down, its ropes shredded, burned at one end. And the water in the pond, clouded, muddy, with some sort of oily film drifting on top. It didn't feel like a party. It felt like a warning. I took photos of everything, every overturned chair, every piece of trash, every broken item. I didn't touch a thing. Then I called Carter and sent the images. He responded in seconds. "Do not clean anything yet. Document it all. I'll have an investigator out this afternoon." While I waited, I printed some of the clearer photos and slid them into envelopes, walking to the HOA neighborhood myself and slipping one into every mailbox I could reach. No note. No explanation. Just evidence. By the time I returned, 2 of the quieter HOA residents, Marcia and her teenage son Ben, were already waiting near the path to the lake. Marcia looked sick. "I saw your pictures," she said, eyes wide. "James." Karen told the board you'd agreed to host a late-night appreciation gathering to celebrate the new fiscal year. She even said you'd be joining. I stared at her, stunned. "She told you I invited them?" She had flyers printed, Ben muttered. She handed them out door to door. I didn't even know what to say to that. My blood was boiling, but beneath that was a cold, calculated pulse. She'd set this up. She'd orchestrated the whole thing, then pinned it on me. Marcia's voice dropped. I don't believe her anymore, and I'm not the only one. My husband, he recognized the grill you showed in the photos. It's from our deck. Karen took it the night before the party, said she needed it for a community event. I couldn't help but laugh, not because it was funny, because the sheer brazenness was so absurd I had to either laugh or scream. Ben helped clean up some of the mess, Marcia said quietly. We didn't know it wasn't sanctioned. You helped clean. He nodded, sheepish. It didn't feel right, just leaving it. It hit me harder than I expected. For all the bullshit swirling around, here were two people who still understood decency. Later that evening, a few more neighbors came by, quietly. One brought a trash bag full of cans they'd gathered. Another admitted seeing Karen dragging tables down the trail. And another, David, an ex-cop who'd retired after 25 years with the Raleigh PD, offered something better. If you haven't already, he said, you need eyes down there. Motion sensor cameras, wireless, hidden. I can help you install them. I didn't hesitate. By sundown, David and I had 3 small trail cams mounted high in the trees surrounding the gazebo, patio, and trailhead. The batteries would last weeks. The memory cards would rotate. If anyone came back, we'd see them. That weekend, the HOA had its scheduled monthly meeting. I wasn't invited, obviously, but news travels fast when people are angry. According to more than one source, things got heated. Karen opened the meeting with a statement blaming ungrateful property owners for trying to turn neighbors against one another. She called the pond a community legacy and described my actions as sabotage. Then she moved to fine every household whose member had participated in unauthorized cleanup on my land, $200 each. But this time, something changed. Marcia stood up. So did David. Then another couple. And another. They didn't yell. They didn't argue. They simply asked Karen what gave her the right to organize an event on land that wasn't hers without notifying the board or even getting approval. Karen blustered. She tried to talk over them, claimed it was implied usage, but someone had printed out the injunction and handed out copies. And when she tried to gavel down the discussion, a small chorus of voices called for a vote. Not a policy vote, a vote of no confidence. According to Marcia, the room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. That night, 3 of the people who had helped clean up the mess joined me by the pond. We lit a fire in the stone ring near the gazebo. We didn't say much, just passed around beers and listened to the cicadas. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like the land was breathing easy again. Karen hadn't lost yet. But the walls were closing in. If Karen thought she could bury a scandal under paperwork and gaslighting, she didn't count on just how fed up her neighbors had become. It started small, whispers between residents, quiet check-ins at mailboxes, late-night texts between board members. Then, like a brush fire catching wind, things spread. Within a week of that disastrous HOA meeting, a coalition of homeowners had formed, and they weren't interested in compromises. They called themselves Restore Chestnut Glen. Carter almost spit his coffee when I told him the name. Sounds like a militia, he muttered, but I like the energy. The group had teeth. Marcia, David, and a local accountant named Kevin who'd spent the last 4 years crunching the HOA's books for free. Kevin, it turned out, had been sitting on some concerns of his own. Inconsistent expense reports, unexplained withdrawals from the maintenance fund, and suspicious event reimbursements going back to Karen's first week in office. He'd been too afraid to say anything before. Karen had a way of making people feel legally small. But now, backed by a crowd of angry neighbors and a former cop with a 6-foot frame and a blunt attitude, Kevin was ready to go nuclear. Carter got involved too. With Kevin's data, he filed a formal request for financial disclosure under North Carolina HOA law. Karen stalled. First, she said the documents were under audit. Then she claimed the board hadn't met quorum. Then she just stopped responding. That's when the coalition filed a class action lawsuit. 32 homeowners signed on, alleging financial mismanagement, abuse of power, unauthorized expenditures, and intentional violation of HOA bylaws. They submitted Kevin's findings, meeting transcripts, recorded statements from residents, and, with Carter's help, copies of the injunction, the trespassing incident, and that very classy unsigned note I'd received. It was a full-blown legal barrage. Karen's response came in true Karen fashion. She called a private emergency session of her remaining loyalists, barred any residents not on the board, and issued a memo claiming that the lawsuit was defamatory and without merit. 2 days later, she tried to push through a sudden increase in HOA dues to create a legal defense fund. That was the last straw. The county judge overseeing the case issued a freeze on HOA finances pending review. A temporary receiver was appointed to oversee day-to-day operations. Karen's access to HOA funds revoked. Her authority to issue fines or policy changes suspended. I didn't hear about that from the news. I heard it from Ben, the teenager who'd once helped me clean up the mess down by the pond. He showed up on my porch with a grin and a paper in his hand. "Mom said you'd want to see this," he said, handing over the official court order. I read it 3 times, slowly. I won't lie, it felt good. Not out of spite, out of relief, out of vindication. Someone had finally stepped in and said, "Enough." But we weren't done yet. That same week, the county forensic accountant assigned to the HOA case made some findings of her own. According to her report, Karen had personally authorized over $280,000 in unsubstantiated community improvements, a fancy term for the wild, inflated charges that couldn't be tied to any legitimate invoices. Many of them went to shell companies with no real staff, no equipment, and, most damning of all, no business licenses. One of those companies, Glenview Resources LLC, owned by Karen's cousin in Florida. The judge didn't wait. A formal fraud investigation was opened. Karen was subpoenaed for documents, devices, and testimony. Her legal team filed a motion to quash the subpoena. The judge denied it in under 30 minutes. And just like that, Karen was no longer just a tyrant. She was a suspect. The homeowners voted unanimously to remove her from her position. The motion passed, 3 votes short of unanimity. Karen's last few loyalists abstained. In her final act of petty vengeance, she sent out one last email to the community, claiming she was stepping down to focus on her legal defense, and that she hoped Chestnut Glen would remember who tried to protect its legacy. That email was printed out and pinned to the community bulletin board. Next to it, a blown-up color photo of the destroyed grill and the hammock ashes, with a caption underneath, "Legacy Indeed." The new interim board, led by David and a retired school principal named Janine, reached out to me directly. They apologized, formally and in writing, for everything that had happened. Then they asked if they could help repair the damage at the lake. I said yes. I didn't do it for goodwill points. I did it because it wasn't just my land anymore. It was my responsibility again, and I was tired of watching it suffer. Together, we started the work. The gazebo roof was patched, the grill was replaced, the trash was cleared, the flowers replanted, the patio was swept, scrubbed, restored. For the first time in months, things felt calm. Of course, in hindsight, I should have known the quiet wouldn't last, not when someone like Karen was still out there, licking her wounds. For a couple of weeks, it seemed like we had finally turned a corner. The lake was quiet again. The HOA, now under new leadership, had pulled back entirely. I even caught myself relaxing, sitting by the pond with a cold beer, watching dragonflies skim across the water, letting the land breathe again. That piece ended at 6:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery, low guttural rumbling echoing through the trees. At first, I thought it was a passing truck on the county road. Then I saw the dust cloud rising beyond the tree line. My stomach dropped. I threw on jeans and boots, didn't even grab coffee, just ran. The trail was shredded, deep tire tracks carved into the soil, broken branches everywhere. When I broke through the last line of trees and reached the pond, I stopped dead in my tracks. It was gone. Not just trashed, gone. The pond had been filled with truckloads of sand and loose dirt. The gazebo, flattened. The patio, smashed, scattered. The grill was bent in half, lying in a ditch. And the pool, the one we'd worked so hard to clean after the party, buried under concrete. Someone had poured fresh cement into the shell overnight and left it to dry. The destruction was surgical, angry, precise. I didn't move for a while. I just stood there, blinking against the morning light, trying to make sense of the ruin. Then I walked through the wreckage, snapping pictures, documenting every crushed corner, every shattered stone, every desecrated inch of my land. This wasn't vandalism, it was retaliation. I called the sheriff's department. Again. Deputy Chavez showed up within the hour. He took one look and let out a low whistle. Damn, this was coordinated. You see anything? Anyone? I shook my head. Nothing. No noise last night. No headlights, like ghosts. He nodded slowly, then said, "Let's get forensics out here. Whoever did this didn't just trespass. They committed felony destruction of property and possibly environmental violations. You need to contact your lawyer again." I already had Carter on the line. He didn't sound surprised. "She's cornered," he said flatly. Of course she lashed out. But now we need proof. Anything on the cameras? I'd nearly forgotten about the trail cams. I rushed back to the house, popped out the memory cards, loaded them on my laptop. The footage was grainy, infrared, black and white, but clear enough. 3 people, one wearing a black hoodie, directing the others. The shape, the posture. I knew it was Karen before I even saw her face. But then, at one point, the hood dropped back, and there she was. Blonde hair tied back, jaw tight, barking instructions like she was still running a board meeting. The 2 men with her were less familiar, but one of them looked like Rick, the old HOA security coordinator. The other wore a beanie and gloves and had a massive build. No name, but I figured that wouldn't be hard to get with Carter's help. The final nail, Karen's voice caught on camera low but clear. Now let's see how he proves ownership of a goddamn sandbox. I sat there in silence, staring at the screen, my hands clenched on the edge of the desk. Then I copied the video to a flash drive, backed it up twice, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Within 48 hours, arrest warrants were issued for Karen Maynard and her 2 accomplices. I got the call at sunrise from Deputy Chavez. She didn't even resist, he said. Acted like this was all a misunderstanding. But the judge wasn't buying it. Neither was the DA. The charges were serious. Criminal vandalism, trespassing, environmental damage, violation of an active court injunction, and conspiracy to commit felony property destruction. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This time, she'd crossed into full-blown criminal territory, and there was no HOA board to shield her now. Karen's mugshot hit the local news by noon. There she was. Same bob haircut, same expression of forced composure, except now she was in an orange jumpsuit and standing under fluorescent lights. The story ran with the headline, HOA President Arrested for Felony Vandalism in Lakefront Property Dispute. The photo made the front page of the county paper, and by sunset, it had made its way onto Reddit. Carter called that evening. "We're not done yet," he said. "This is criminal, but we're also going civil." I didn't even have to ask what he meant. Karen hadn't just damaged property. She'd violated court orders, caused financial loss, destroyed personal and family assets, and had the audacity to record herself doing it. We filed a civil suit for damages the very next day. The DA moved quickly. Karen's initial hearing was brief. Her lawyer, some greasy guy with gelled hair and a loud tie, argued that her actions were symbolic and that the land had been under dispute for years. The judge looked unimpressed. "This wasn't symbolism," he said, flipping through the arrest file. "This was trespassing, premeditated destruction, and a flagrant violation of court orders. Bail is denied." Denied. Karen spent the next 3 weeks in county lockup awaiting trial. Her co-conspirators fared no better. Rick, the HOA's former security chief, turned out to be her longtime personal friend. And the beanie guy, a hired contractor from out of town with a rap sheet longer than a church sermon. All 3 were hit with multiple felony charges, and unlike HOA meetings, there was no room to talk over the judge. Meanwhile, we began calculating the civil damages. Carter brought in a property assessor, environmental specialist, and a contractor to evaluate every inch of destruction. The pond would take months to restore. The concrete from the pool couldn't just be scraped out. It had to be broken up, hauled away, and the soil underneath tested for contamination. The trees that had been torn down weren't just landscaping. They were protected species in a designated environmental buffer zone. The final claim, $287,400 in property damages, restoration costs, environmental penalties, and legal fees. Karen's response? Silence. Through her lawyer, she tried to negotiate a lower settlement. Carter didn't blink. "Not a penny less," he said. "She didn't just trespass. She waged war." When the civil court date arrived, I expected a long battle. Instead, it was almost anticlimactic. Karen's lawyer offered no real defense. With the video evidence, the forensic reports, and the testimony of witnesses, including David, Marcia, and Kevin, it was open and shut. The judge ruled in our favor on all counts, full damages awarded, a lien placed on Karen's property and assets. She would either pay or lose everything. I remember sitting in the courtroom as the verdict was read, watching Karen stare at the table, lips tight, hands trembling. The fall from power to prosecution had been swift. But what struck me most wasn't how far she'd fallen. It was how easily she could have avoided it all. One phone call, one moment of decency, one apology. But no, she had chosen war. And she'd lost. Outside the courtroom, a small crowd had gathered. HOA members, journalists, even a couple of college kids filming for a documentary on community legal battles. I didn't talk to anyone. I just walked past them down the steps, out into the crisp late autumn air. David met me at the bottom, handed me a coffee, and clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he said. "No," I replied, looking back toward the courthouse. "We did." The thing about justice is, it doesn't bring back what was lost. It just makes damn sure no one forgets who took it. Over the next few months, the land started healing. It was a slow, messy process. Restoring a pond isn't like fixing a broken fence. You can't just dig a hole and pour in water. You have to rebuild the ecosystem from the bottom up. We brought in environmental consultants who specialized in habitat recovery. They drained out the sludge and sand, regraded the basin, lined it properly, and allowed the natural spring to refill it over time. It was expensive, it was exhausting, but it was worth every dollar and drop of sweat. The community rallied behind me. Chestnut Glen, now under the interim board's leadership, contributed volunteers for cleanup and some limited funding from the reserve budget. Carefully audited, of course. David coordinated schedules. Marcia and her husband planted native grasses along the bank. Even Kevin, the accountant, showed up with work gloves and a cooler of cold drinks. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the guy on the edge of town. I felt like part of something again. We rebuilt the gazebo from scratch. Not a prefab kit this time. Real lumber, real nails, and every board sanded by hand. Ben helped stain the beams. We engraved a small plaque on one of the posts. "In memory of peace reclaimed." The grill was replaced too, this time anchored into stone, with a steel lid heavy enough to stop a truck. Someone, probably Janine, left a custom apron hanging on it one morning. It read, "Grill Sergeant." I laughed for 10 minutes straight. The pool couldn't be salvaged. The concrete had contaminated the underlying soil too deeply. But I didn't rebuild it. Instead, we transformed that area into a wildflower garden. Sunflowers, milkweed, black-eyed Susans, and bee balm. It became a haven for butterflies, and a reminder that beauty can grow from broken ground. As for Karen, well, she wasn't part of our story anymore. She took a plea deal. 6 years in prison, no parole for at least 4. Restitution payments, court mandated. Her property went into foreclosure after she failed to meet the first deadline. Last I heard, someone from Wilmington bought it at auction and planned to flip it. Good luck to them. That house had bad karma in the drywall. Rick and the contractor both pled guilty too. Lesser sentences, but felony records all the same. And just like that, the storm was over. Carter and I finalized the last piece of the puzzle 6 months later, a formal binding agreement between me and the new HOA board. It clearly defined the boundary lines, the usage terms, and most importantly, the irrevocable nature of my ownership. No more verbal deals, no more gentlemen's agreements. Everything in writing, signed, notarized, filed with the county. Clause 5 was my favorite. No structure, event, gathering, or installation may occur within 100 feet of the shoreline without the express written permission of the landowner. We laminated it and framed it in the new gazebo. That summer, we hosted a real celebration. No trespassing, no sabotage, no lies. Just neighbors, families, grilled corn, laughter, and kids splashing by the shore. A bluegrass band played under string lights. Ben launched homemade fireworks off the dock. I handed out hot dogs in my new Grill Sergeant apron, watching the smoke curl into the pink-orange sky. At one point, Janine came up beside me, sipping lemonade. "You really fought for this," she said. "I hope you know how much it meant to all of us." I looked out at the water, clear again, rippling softly under the glow of lanterns, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 2 years. "Yeah," I said. "I do."